The typical American household now entering its final stretch before retirement has $40,000 saved, not 400,000, 40. That number comes from the National Institute on Retirement Security, and it describes Generation X, the 65 million Americans born between 1965 and 1980. Here's the strange part. This is also the generation with some of the most disciplined saving behavior in the country. They contribute to their retirement accounts. They avoid credit card balances like the plague. They keep emergency funds that would make a financial planner weep with joy. And yet, statistically, they are the least prepared generation for retirement in modern American history. That contradiction is not an accident, and it is not a character flaw. Generation X was the test group in the largest financial experiment ever run on a single generation. Nobody asked for their consent, nobody explained the rules, and the results are now coming in on a very specific deadline. Today we are going to walk through what actually happened in 4 parts. And by the end, the strangest money habits of the people born between 1965 and 1980 will make perfect sense. Problem 1. The Great Experiment. In 1978, Congress passed the Revenue Act, and buried inside it was a small provision called Section 401k. It was designed as a minor tax clarification for executive bonus plans. Nobody in Congress stood up and announced that they were about to dismantle the American retirement system because nobody in Congress knew. Then, in 1981, a benefits consultant named Ted Benna read that provision carefully and realized it could be used to build an entirely new kind of retirement account, funded by workers themselves out of their own paychecks. Corporate America looked at this arrangement, compared it to the cost of running traditional pensions, and made a decision with remarkable speed. In 1980, roughly 4 in 10 private sector workers were covered by a traditional pension, a guaranteed check for life, funded and managed by the employer. Today, it is closer to 1 in 10. The pension did not die of natural causes. It was replaced, deliberately, because a 401k is dramatically cheaper for the company. Now, consider the timing. Generation X entered the workforce between the mid-80s and the late 90s, which means they arrived at work precisely as this transition was happening. The boomers ahead of them got at least partial pension coverage. The millennials behind them at least knew the deal from day one. Generation X got something worse than either. They got the switch, mid-game. Political scientist Jacob Hacker calls this the Great Risk Shift. 3 separate risks that companies use to carry: market risk, longevity risk, and the risk of simply making bad investment decisions, were quietly transferred from corporate balance sheets onto individual households. A pension actuary with decades of training used to manage those risks. Now it was a 30-year-old with a mortgage, 2 kids, and a brochure. The experiment had begun, and Generation X was the first cohort to run it from start to finish. Problem 2. The worst timing in modern market history. Even a flawed system can work if the market cooperates. For Generation X, the market did not cooperate. It staged an ambush. Follow the sequence. The oldest Gen Xers began seriously saving in the late 90s, right as the stock market reached some of the most expensive valuations ever recorded. Then came the dot-com crash. Between 2000 and 2002, the Nasdaq lost roughly 78% of its value. For a generation in its first real decade of investing, that was the opening lesson. They rebuilt. Many bought homes in the mid-2000s because that was what responsible adults did, and prices only ever went up. Then came 2008. The S&P 500 fell 57% from its peak. Home values cratered, and Gen X, then aged 28 to 43, took the hit at the worst possible moment, early enough that their balances were built from contributions rather than compounding, late enough that the losses were life-changing money. 2 generational crashes inside 1 decade. Here is where the psychology gets interesting. The economists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky demonstrated that human beings feel a loss roughly twice as intensely as an equivalent gain. It is called loss aversion, and it is not a personality quirk. It is wiring. Now apply that wiring to a generation that watched 2 market collapses before turning 45. Many Gen X households did exactly what loss aversion predicts. They de-risked. They moved to cash near the bottom. They kept contributing, but conservatively, suspiciously, with one hand on the exit. And so, when the market staged one of the longest bull runs in American history from 2009 onward, a meaningful share of Generation X watched it from the sidelines or participated with only part of their money. The crashes cost them once. The caution cost them twice. That is the cruelest arithmetic in behavioral finance. The scar tissue does more damage than the wound. Problem 3. The sandwich squeeze. The retirement math assumes something very convenient. It assumes that your 40s and 50s, your peak earning years, are also your peak saving years. The kids grow up, the expenses fall, and the surplus flows into the retirement account. For Generation X, that assumption collapsed on both ends at once. According to Pew Research, 54% of Americans in their 40s are now supporting both an aging parent and a child at the same time. They are the sandwich generation, and the sandwich is being compressed. On one side, their parents are living longer than any generation before them, which is wonderful and staggeringly expensive. Long-term care in America routinely runs to 6 figures a year, and Medicare, contrary to popular belief, does not cover most of it. On the other side, their children are staying financially attached for longer. Higher rents, student debt, and a brutal starter home market mean the money keeps flowing down the family tree years after the old model said it would stop. So the decade that was supposed to be the great catching up period, the years when the retirement account finally gets serious, is instead being spent funding a college tuition in one direction and a memory care facility in the other. This is not a story about undisciplined people. It is a story about disciplined people standing in the middle of a wealth transfer that runs in both directions, away from them. And every dollar that leaves does its damage twice, because a dollar spent at 50 is also every dollar it would have compounded into by 70. Problem 4. The 2032 collision. Now we arrive at the deadline, because this experiment has a scheduled ending. Return to the National Institute on Retirement Security data and look closer, because the $40,000 median hides something worse. The bottom quarter of Gen X earners has a median of about $200 saved for retirement. $200. The average across the generation looks healthier, around $149,000, but averages are what happen when you put one executive and 9 warehouse workers in a room and announce that the typical person in the room is a millionaire. The median tells the truth. Half of Gen X households are approaching 60 with less than a year of expenses saved. And here is where the calendar becomes genuinely dark comedy. The oldest members of Generation X, born in 1965, reach their full Social Security retirement age of 67 in the year 2032. According to the latest Social Security trustees' projections, the retirement trust fund is expected to run short at almost exactly that moment in 2032 or 2033. If Congress does nothing, the system does not go bankrupt. That is a myth. But incoming payroll taxes would cover only about 77 to 80% of scheduled benefits. Read those two sentences together. The first generation to retire without pensions, the generation holding $40,000 at the median, is scheduled to arrive at the Social Security window in the exact year the window is projected to start paying 77 cents on the dollar. Every previous generation had at least one leg of the old 3-legged stool, the pension, personal savings, and Social Security, standing firmly. Generation X is arriving with one leg sawed short, one leg wobbling, and one leg that Congress has left balanced on a repair notice for 30 years. So what do we actually learn from all of this? First, that the strange money behavior of Generation X, the hoarded cash, the distrust of institutions, the refusal to carry a credit card balance, the obsessive self-reliance, is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition. They are behaving exactly the way you would expect rational people to behave after being handed the switch mid-game and then ambushed by the market twice. Second, that the experiment is not over, and its final chapter is not yet written. For Gen X households, the levers still exist, and they are bigger than most people realize. Catch-up contributions allow workers over 50 to put thousands of extra dollars a year into retirement accounts on top of the standard limit. Delaying Social Security from 62 to 70 raises the monthly check by roughly 77% for life. And the same compounding that was stolen from their 30s still works in their 50s, it just demands larger inputs. And third, for everyone younger watching this, understand what Generation X actually is. They are the data from the experiment you are now enrolled in. Their $40,000 median is not their failure. It is the system's test result. You do not get to opt out of the experiment, but unlike them, you get to see the results before you make your choices. Understanding money is your best defense.